Thanks so much for sharing your insights. I really appreciate it. So I was wondering to hear your thoughts on sort of the revolution that's happening with blockchain technology and decentralized networks. I'm really curious to understand how 200 years from now, when people look back at our time and the big turning points that will redefine society and our civilization. If we think about it, like all these things are happening, you highlighted some of them. And I'm just wondering how you think about this whole clash between hierarchies, centralization, and decentralization, and all this stuff that's going on. Because as Edmund Burke, the historian, said, like, we have to have a contract between generations, and a lot of people don't understand blockchain technology. It's not very intuitive. So I'm just curious to understand how you see all these different decentralized trends and distributed networks and how this affects society, because it's happening right now.
So your question is exactly at the center of what I mentioned was, I thought, the dichotomy on this issue. Because on one hand, we're putting enormous power in the hands of individuals, and at the same time, we're terrified of the result of that, in some cases by overreacting. The specifics about blockchain are pretty straightforward, which is that the ledger that's part of blockchain is likely to be a fundamental computer science platform. The fact that you can have distributed ledgers that accurately keep information that's not copyable or fungible, if you will, is a major computer science advance. But if you look, all the great optimists about blockchain and Bitcoin have been stymied by the historic structures of banking, which were erected after enormous financial failures. And they're not likely to be very liberal. Right? It's just not who they didn't hire liberals to do this, by definition. The liberals were the ones who got them in trouble 50 years ago. You asked a question about 200 years, and I think here is a build on how 200 years might look like. For the next 5 to 10 years, the AI stuff that I'm talking about is incredibly obviously beneficial. Right? So I mentioned healthcare, I mentioned drug discovery, I mentioned basic science, transportation, these kinds of things. And it's happening so quickly, I don't think people understand how quickly our lives will change, in the same sense that 10 years ago. Remember, the iPhone came out in roughly 2007, right? So that was roughly 10 years ago. I don't think people understood the impact of having such a powerful supercomputer on your hand would have. I think it'll be the similar thing. What happens after that? A lot of people in my community believe that we're going to be able to get to the point where computers can have aspects of human intelligence that look like intuition, right? That they have memory and that they have the ability to do the equivalent of dreaming. I don't mean soul-like dreaming. I mean dreaming in the sense of imagining scenarios and putting interesting things together. If that's true, then at some point, perhaps in my lifetime, it should be possible to feed, for example, all of math into this computer and all of physics into this computer and behold some new discoveries and some real effect on timing. It gets harder to see what happens after that, right? How does this emergent technology evolve in a 50-year period? If you'd said, I mentioned that the computer that I used, which was 40 years ago, is 100 million times slower than the one that is in its place today. It's very difficult to imagine 50 years from now what that could be. Eventually, you have to assume that there will be, the brain is a biological moment, and eventually the brain will be much, much better understood, and that there'll be greater connection between the brain and these digital systems. Exactly how that will be achieved is a matter of science fiction.